He thought I was just the assistant. He barked for the password like I owed him obedience. So I sent the contract and let the clause speak. The room still smelled like someone else's authority. Polished walnut, cold metal accents, a sleek black screen with his name already embossed on the digital doorplate, Thatcher J. Lynn, Director of Operations. The man himself hadn't even learned the names of the people on his floor, but he was already asking for passwords. I watched from across the glass partition as he tossed his messenger bag on the credenza like a proclamation. His eyes didn't meet mine when he spoke through the open doorway. "Can you send me the system password?" "No, please. No, could you? Just password now." There was a time when that tone would have made me flinch, but not today. I kept my voice level. "Which system?" He sighed, annoyed. "The vendor archive, the secure side." I blinked once, slow. "That's not something I can send you without protocol." That made him pause. He finally looked at me, scanning for weakness. "Are you new?" I smiled. 17 years, actually. That's when his posture changed. Not in respect, never that, but in calculation. He tilted his head like a hawk, measuring the size of the cage. "Then you'll know how to forward me the vendor history for contract S-09. Complete file, PDF, no scans." I stood up. "You'll need to log your request in the legal scan queue." Another sigh. "Jesus, I'm the director. Just send it." But the truth was that contract wasn't just paper. It was a loaded gun sitting under a silk napkin. The file had been dormant for 9 years. A high-profile vendor deal signed by his predecessor, Miles Cohen, after a months-long dispute that had nearly gone to arbitration. I still remembered the sleepless week we'd spent reviewing every line of that clause. Default, liability, ownership rollover. Clause 14.7. In the event of internal termination or misappropriation of licensing assets, default shall incur a $480,000 penalty, enforceable within 90 days. And it bore one signature only, Miles Cohen, Director Operations. Back then, our legal lead had insisted we lock the clause behind an encrypted subdirectory outside of standard read access, even for successors. That was the instruction, and no one had questioned it, until now. By lunchtime, Thatcher had looped in IT, HR, and his executive assistant. His tone shifted from impatient to accusatory. He copied legal without context. He BCC'd finance. The subject line read, "Access blocked. Urgent review. Contract S-09. That's when I knew he was trying to position something, to rewrite the hallway story into a tale of non-compliant legacy staff. I'd seen it before. I'd survived it before. So I did what I always do. I printed out page 2, highlighted the clause, forwarded the file through our official request portal, logged and time-stamped, CC'd to legal for transparency. I attached one line. Per protocol, please find attached S-09, page 2 highlighted. Clause 14.7 applies. 3 minutes later, the legal scan bot replied with a seal of confirmation, then silence. At 3:12 p.m., he stormed past my desk, eyes sharp. "You just cost this company $500,000. I raised an eyebrow. "No, Mr. Lin, I preserved it." He froze. "Excuse me?" I opened the vendor dashboard on my screen. With one click, I brought up the signature, the clause, the audit trail, his name nowhere in sight because he hadn't even existed here when that deal was struck. But now he had tried to alter its conditions, which, per the agreement, constituted breach by internal interference. The room went very, very quiet. He didn't know yet, but he was the default. She didn't raise her voice. She just raised the clause, and the floor beneath him began to shake. Thatcher didn't return to his office for the rest of the afternoon. Instead, he paced the corridor, phone glued to his ear, ducking into doorways, lowering his voice near water coolers. HR glanced up every time he passed, their screens full of messages they weren't typing. Finance stopped pretending to ignore the legal scan bot notifications that had begun pinging like a heartbeat under stress. I didn't gloat. I filed. 3 windows open. The vendor clause archive, blinking red. The legal scan summary report. My own documentation log, because men like him don't go down alone. They grab whoever isn't watching. And I've been watching since 2013. At 5:04 p.m., an alert popped up in the corner of my screen. Request for access override. Submitted by Thatcher J. Lynn Bold Move. Especially considering Clause 14.7 specifically outlined unauthorized override attempts as evidence of misconduct. I scrolled down and saw the note he'd attached. Legacy staff may be blocking systems due to misinterpretation of archival protocols, requesting full access to S09 to resolve. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. He was setting the stage. If legal believed I was the bottleneck, he could claim his breach was accidental, driven by confusion, non-cooperation, lack of transition documentation. It was a corporate playbook classic. If you can't delete the clause, delete the credibility of the person who found it. But this time, I wasn't playing reactive. I looped in our lead compliance officer, Maya, a quiet force of nature, 2 decades in corporate litigation before she joined us. Maya didn't raise flags, she raised verdicts. I wrote, "Hi Maya. For awareness, a request override has been submitted on S-09. Clause 14.7 explicitly prohibits internal tampering or unauthorized escalation. Attached is the full audit trail from 2014 plus original counsel notes. FYI, Mr. Lin referred to this as a legacy staff obstruction in his override request. Time-stamped, sealed, and CC'd for transparency," she replied within 6 minutes. One line. "This will be reviewed under Policy 9.4. Please retain all logs." And that's when I saw it. At the bottom of the original scanned contract, just beneath Miles Cohen's signature, was a faint secondary stamp. Not digital, not scanned. Ink. Initialed. MRP Maria Rodriguez Peña, our former external counsel. Which meant the contract wasn't just internal, it had third-party legal recognition. Any violation could trigger civil-level review, not just HR-level drama. At 5:39 p.m., Thatcher sent an all-staff email. Subject: Transition Audit Legacy Compliance Review. The body? Thinly veiled threat. Phrases like reviewing inherited procedures, cross-departmental inconsistencies, alignment with current leadership. No one replied. But the silence in the office grew teeth. I got up, walked down the corridor, and as I passed HR, I saw their screen open to a window titled Termination Scenarios. Policy 4.1 Conflict Clauses. He was trying to spin it. Fast. Get ahead of the fallout. Make it look like my actions had destabilized something. But it was already too late. Because Vendor Clause 14.7 didn't care who sat in the big chair. It only cared whether it was respected. And by 6:15 p.m., the legal scan summary updated with a tag, default triggered, Clause 14.7, status, active review. By the time he sent the email, the contract had already sent the signal, and someone much higher was watching. Ever seen a $480,000 clause hit harder than a promotion? Stick around. The silence upstairs just got official. The next morning, the air in the office was no longer neutral. People didn't speak in the halls. They hovered. Eyes darted toward Thatcher's office. Door shut. Blinds drawn. The blinds were never drawn. A badge access log leaked into the wrong Slack channel. 7:02 a.m. Legal team, level 4. Conference room C7:05 a.m. Compliance lead, Maya Singh, present 7:12 a.m. Thatcher J. Lynn, entry denied, insufficient clearance. He was locked out of the legal floor. That wasn't just protocol. That was a message. I kept my head down and my desktop up. Legal scan refreshed every 15 minutes. The banner across the top had changed from yellow to red. S-09 active default enforcement. Review pending arbitration. I knew what that meant. The clause was now a live wire, and anyone touching it was part of the current. At 8:14 a.m., I received an invite to a new calendar event. S-09 Contract Clarification. Internal Stakeholder Review. Location: Legal East Time. 9 a.m. Attendees: me, Maya, the company's in-house counsel, and the CFO, not Thatcher. The walk to Legal East felt like moving inside a muted storm. My heels echoed against concrete tile while behind every frosted door, people turned toward whispers. Their silence was a form of insurance. Inside the conference room, Maya was already there, a man in a navy suit beside her, Ryan Voss, corporate legal, eyes like static. And at the end of the table, CFO Lucia Torres, reviewing a folder with the kind of calm that makes people fear accountants. Lucia looked up. "Thank you for your clarity yesterday." I nodded. "Just followed the protocol." Maya slid a paper across the table. Clause 14.7 isn't just binding, it's self-enforcing under the vendor's protection agreement. You highlighted it, you logged it, you timestamped it. That protects the company. Lucia closed the folder. Thatcher's override request was escalated to the vendor's counsel this morning. They responded. Their stance is clear. Any interference constitutes breach. I exhaled, slowly. Ryan leaned in. "You understand what this means, yes?" "I do," I said. "It's not personal. It's procedural." At 9:47 a.m., I returned to my desk. There were 2 new emails waiting. Subject: "Thank you. Documentation received." From Maya Singh: "Your attention to protocol helped us avoid material loss. Retain all logs and stay visible." Subject: "System access revoked?" From Thatcher J. "Lynn, why is my badge not working for level 4? Please advise. This is interfering with operations." I didn't reply to the second. At 10:02 a.m., the Slack thread for Ops leadership changed membership. Thatcher J. Lynn removed plus Lucia Torres. Added temporary oversight. Then, 2 minutes later, a new directive from HR pinged every inbox in our vertical. Effective immediately, all vendor-facing communications require dual approval, legal plus ops compliance. Thatcher's name wasn't listed on either team. By noon, his office door was still closed, but the silence had changed flavor. This wasn't the discomfort of a transition. This was the stillness before structural movement. I got up for coffee. As I passed the glass wall, I saw his silhouette, still, frozen. One hand on the back of his chair, one on the edge of his desk, staring down at something that refused to go away, probably page 2, where his predecessor's signature still lived, where the clause still breathed, where no override could erase what had already been logged. By Thursday, the word interim began circling the office like a hawk. No official statements, no emails from the C-suite, just subtle shifts in visibility. Thatcher's name was missing from the daily briefing notes. His Outlook calendar went dark. The access panel on his door blinked amber, not green, and on Slack, someone had renamed the OpsLin channel to OpsTemp. But what really sealed it? The legal scan portal changed his user role from Dire Ops to Observer, restricted. I was printing out backup copies of the clause file, one for compliance, one for vendor relations, when Lucia Torres stopped by my desk. No warning, no entourage, just her presence, precise and unnerving. She didn't sit. She placed a thumb drive on my desk. "Encrypted copy of the review," she said. "Vendors outside counsel responded this morning. Clause 14.7 is active, retroactively enforceable. They want assurances that no further access attempts will be made." I blinked. Are they suggesting legal action? "They're not suggesting anything," Lucia said. "They're observing." She tapped the drive. "We don't need a court case. We need internal closure." She looked at me for a second longer than necessary. "Thank you for not looking away." And then she was gone. At 2:17 p.m., I received a calendar update, new event, vendor contract risk review, internal closeout time. Friday, 8 a.m., attendees, legal, compliance, CFO room, board south optional, me optional. That word did more than I expected. It meant, you did your part. It meant, we see you. It meant, you're no longer in the blast radius. But not everyone had gotten the message. That evening, as I packed up, a direct message from an unknown Slack alias lit up my screen. User, Offsite Consult 87. You think this ends with a clause? Watch your access. Charming. I took a screenshot. Forwarded it to Maya. Her reply came within 3 minutes. Confirmed. Alias linked to temp contractor hired by Thatcher. Access already revoked. IT tracing. You are protected. Stay calm. Stay documented. It was the last part that stuck with me. Stay documented. By Friday morning, the air had changed again. Not tense, cautious, like walking through a museum just after closing, when every light flickers on sensor delay and every sound echoes too far. At 7:58 a.m., I walked past Board South. Through the frosted glass, I saw silhouettes. Maya, Lucia, Ryan. An empty chair waited at the head of the table. Not for Thatcher, for protocol. They weren't closing out a man. They were closing out a liability. At 10:23 a.m., HR pushed an update to the company org chart. The title Director of Operations was now marked under strategic review, no name attached, no face to replace, just a blank space and a vendor clause that did its job. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the monitors steady around me. Some victories don't sound like applause. They sound like nothing. No override, no breach, no more questions, just silence, and a signature that never needed defending. By Monday, the desks around me had returned to their normal rhythm, emails tapping, phones ringing, printers humming with minor urgency. But something underneath had changed, not just in Thatcher's absence, in the way people looked at systems, at procedures, at me. For 17 years, I'd been invisible glue. Now I was a point of reference. A new request came in from procurement. Hi, we're reviewing vendor clauses on projects post-2015. Would you be open to hosting a workshop on best practices? Workshop. Not complaint. Not reprimand. Not oversight. That word felt strange, but I typed, happy to help. Let's schedule something after Wednesday. I'll prepare clause samples. Because that's what real leverage looks like. Not power over people, but power over your own integrity. And that clause? It wasn't a weapon. It was a wall, one I'd built, stone by stone, log by log. Midweek, I crossed paths with Ryan Voss near the elevator. He gave me a quiet nod. You're the reason we didn't spend $500,000, he said, and the reason legal's rewriting how we onboard directors. I blinked. I thought that kind of thing disappears into HR folders. He smirked. Not this time. Vendor counsel asked to reference the case as a model of internal enforcement. You might get quoted. I laughed, a little stunned. In a legal digest? He nodded. With initials, of course. But yes, Clause 14.7 will have footnotes now. I stood there for a second too long, processing it. The quiet, the ripple. The fact that a moment I had flagged years ago in a haze of red ink and vendor panic had actually meant something, had lasted. On Thursday, I finally cleared my private archive, scanned files, sticky notes from 2014, a coffee-stained memo from legal reminding us that any override requests must be submitted in writing with legal review. I smiled. As I shredded the duplicate copies, a final envelope slipped loose from the folder. Clause prep. Backup. Do not delete. Inside, a printed version of the page, Miles Cohen's signature, the ink barely faded, and a note in his handwriting. This clause may outlast both of us. Good. I kept that page, tucked it into a leather folio I rarely used. Not to frame it, not to brag, but as a reminder. Sometimes your job is to see what others want to skip. Sometimes your power isn't in passwords or titles or open office doors. Sometimes it's in knowing exactly which page matters. Friday evening. The office emptied out early, the way it always did before a long weekend. Lights dimmed, coffee machines hissed their final breath, and hallway sensors clicked into low power mode. But I stayed. Not out of obligation, out of clarity. There were things that needed documenting, not because anyone had asked it, but because some chapters deserved to be archived with care. I reopened the legal scan portal, not to file a report, to reread one. Case ID S-09-DFLT-L4. Status: resolved. Outcome: no internal losses. Clause 14.7 held. Override attempt blocked. Liability averted. Footnotes at the bottom. Reviewed and validated by external counsel, triggered by legacy staff compliance. Reference timestamp T-0947. Standing clause enforceable on future disputes. The language was clinical. Cold, but I knew what it really said. Someone tried to play God with a system that doesn't forget, and the system remembered who didn't look away. At 7:03 p.m., the office was down to two glowing rectangles, mine and Maya's. She passed by, coat folded over one arm, paused in my doorway. "You staying late to make us look bad?" she asked, voice light. "Just wrapping loose ends." She tilted her head. "This whole thing, it's going to echo for a while. Policy updates, contract audits, new onboarding formats." I nodded. I didn't expect it to go this far. Maya smiled, half tired, half proud. "That's because you were focused on doing it right, not making it loud. And that's what made the clause work. It didn't need noise, it just needed someone steady." After she left, I opened a new document. Title: Lessons from Clause 14.7, Internal Risk Protocols. And I started writing, not for them, for the ones who come after, for the assistants, coordinators, analysts, and quiet compliance managers who keep the blood in the company's veins moving, even when no one's clapping. In the final paragraph, I wrote, "When someone demands the password, ask them which system. When someone questions your caution, hand them the clause. And when they try to override history, let the contract answer." Then I saved the file, uploaded it to the shared archive, tagged it, "Compliance training greater than critical incidents greater than S-09 reference," and closed the laptop. The lights in the office flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the city glowed under a sky that had no idea what nearly happened in a quiet building on the 12th floor. No headline, no scandal, just a signature, just a clause, just a woman who read every page and didn't blink. 3 weeks later, the new interim director of operations started. Her name was Elena Miralles, former risk auditor, no nonsense, fluent in vendor compliance and known for dismantling loopholes with surgical precision. She introduced herself not with a speech, but with a 5-line memo. "Hello, team. I'm not here to undo what works. I'm here to make sure what failed never repeats. If you ever see something, document it. My door is open. My inbox is monitored. Elena." People buzzed, of course. That kind of entry carries a chill and a challenge, but to me it was something else, a quiet signal that the ecosystem had learned. Elena called me into her office on her 3rd day. No assistants. No executive scheduling layers. She poured 2 coffees, no sugar, no milk, just black, like she knew how systems stay awake. "I read through S-09, she said. "And?" "You weren't just right," she replied. "You were complete." Then she handed me a file. "Training module draft, clause escalation procedures. Internal only at the bottom. Contributor redacted, pending consent for publication." I scanned the file. It was my document, the one I wrote in silence 3 Fridays ago. "You mind if we roll this out as part of the new onboarding for ops staff?" she asked. "There's no one better to tell them what vigilance looks like." I blinked. "Only if my name stays redacted." She smiled. "Deal." Later that week, I noticed something strange. The old access terminal to the vendor archive had been removed. In its place, a new biometric scanner, retina plus badge verification, and just above it, a placard. "Integrity lives in the fine print." People chuckled at it, took photos, posted it to Slack as a meme, but those who knew, they didn't laugh. They nodded, because that print once held $480,000 on the line, and won. Maya sent me a 1-line message the following Monday. "Contract S10 is being renegotiated. We're keeping the clause format. 14.7 lives on." And just like that, a decision made in the quiet corner of a policy binder became institutional DNA. That's what real change looks like in corporate life. Not explosions, not scandals, but clauses. Buried deep, reviewed carefully, held by people who don't need attention to make impact. At lunch, I passed the empty glass office where Thatcher used to sit, now repurposed into a project lounge, sunlight flooding through windows that had once been shaded by arrogance. The room felt bigger now, maybe because no one was trying to block the light anymore. The following quarter, something unusual happened. Our team was invited to present at the annual Vendor Risk Summit, a conference that, until now, had always been reserved for legal brass and external compliance consultants. This time, the invite came with a surprising addendum. Panel. When internal protocol saves external cost. Case study. S09 lead. Contributor. Redacted. Internal ops. The moment I saw it, my heart stuttered, not because I wanted the attention, but because the industry, the wider machine of contracts, risk, finance, liability, had noticed. Elena called me into her office again, her tone, as always, brisk but respectful. They want someone from inside the case to speak. Name optional, but insights mandatory. I hesitated. What do I even say? She looked me square in the eye. Say what you did. Say why it mattered. Say what could have happened if you hadn't. 3 weeks later, I stood in a modest blazer in a sterile conference room, clutching a folder labeled Confidential, Training Copy Only. I wasn't introduced by name, just by impact. And when I walked through the timeline, the default clause, the override attempt, the legal pingbacks, the timestamp trail, the room stilled. Executives leaned forward. Legal counsel stopped typing. A VP from another firm actually said out loud, "Wait, your system flagged the override attempt before it processed?" I nodded, because it was never about speed. It was about precision. Afterward, one of the vendor leads approached me. "I've read hundreds of contracts," she said. "I've seen clauses ignored, buried, deleted. This one, 14.7, it was airtight. Who drafted it?" I smiled. Someone who didn't think he'd be thanked for it. Just someone who didn't want to clean up a mess 5 years later. Back home, our company's internal bulletin posted a simple headline, S09 cited as best practice at Vendor Risk Summit. No photos, no fanfare. Just a link to the presentation deck, redacted, and a footer. Sometimes the strongest defense is a clause written by someone you've never met. I got 3 messages that day. None from execs, all from assistants. I just printed all our old contracts, starting a clause index. Didn't realize how much that stuff matters. Thank you. You made silence feel like a shield. Needed that. It was then I realized Thatcher had been a wave. Loud, crashing, full of bluster. But clause 14.7, it was the undertow, invisible, quiet, and strong enough to pull down anyone who didn't respect its depth. By the end of Q2, the S09 incident was no longer just a case study. It had become the standard. Vendor clauses across departments were reevaluated. A cross-functional audit task force was created, not to chase blame, but to chase gaps. And in one surreal moment, IT sent me a form titled Legacy Keeper Access, Request for Extended Oversight. It wasn't about a promotion. It was recognition that trust isn't a title, it's a trail. One afternoon, a junior coordinator, Lena, approached me in the break room, clutching a folder like it might burn her fingers. "I think something's off with V19, she whispered. "It's missing an escalation clause. No fallback language. Should I flag it or—" She trailed off, unsure. I nodded gently. "Write it up. Log the concern, add it to the clause tracker, then CC legal, quietly." Her eyes widened. "That's it?" "That's how you move tectonic plates," I said, one clause at a time. That night, I stayed late again, not to fix something, to revisit something. I pulled up the original S09 archive, not the digital copy, but the paper file. Tabs worn, edges curled, clause 14.7 still highlighted in yellow, the ink slightly faded, and next to it, a hand-scrawled note in red pen. "This clause assumes no one's watching. Be the one who is." I don't know who wrote that. It wasn't Miles. It wasn't me. Maybe someone in legal. Maybe just someone who cared. But it stayed. Unchanged. Undeleted. A warning and a promise. The next morning, Elena stopped by my desk with 2 coffees again. Her version of gratitude. "We're being asked to consult on external contract reviews now. Apparently, S09 spooked a few vendors. They're asking for our formatting." I raised an eyebrow. "Our formatting?" "Our discipline," she clarified. "Turns out, not many companies have staff who log override attempts before the breach happens." I didn't say anything, because I remembered the moment, the exact breath between password now and my quiet, measured reply, the second where it could have gone wrong and didn't. Later that week, a new onboarding document circulated. Simple title, "When the Clause is the Firewall." In the preface, I spotted my words. You're not just reading pages, you're reading futures. Treat every clause like someone's job depends on it, because one day it might. No signature, no byline, just protocol. The kind that protects companies and the kind that protects people who refuse to look away. That's what Clause 14.7 gave me. Not revenge, not a nameplate, but proof that silence can win. That vigilance has weight, and that sometimes the most powerful thing in the room is a line on page 2. It had been 6 months since the clause woke up. 6 months since a demand for a password triggered a quiet, precise storm. Since silence became strategy. Since page 2 whispered louder than any voice in the boardroom. And yet, its echo hadn't faded. In the company's annual review deck, the glossy one sent to stakeholders and external auditors, there was a new slide under Operational Resilience. Title, Case Reference, Internal Risk Mitigation, S09, 3 bullet points. No drama, no names, just outcomes. Contract default avoided, $480,000. Unauthorized override blocked, pre-execution protocol updated, adopted company-wide. And at the bottom, a quote. Sometimes the most expensive decision is the one made without context. I stared at that slide longer than I expected, not because I needed credit, but because it was real, visible, permanent. Elena eventually removed the word interim from her title. No memo, no announcement, just a quiet update to her email signature, Elena Miralles, Director of Operations. The same title Thatcher once wore like a badge, now held like a tool. She stopped by my desk that Friday. Hey, she said, Vendor 22 just submitted their updated clause proposal. Legal flagged it. Too much gray language. Want to tag team it Monday? I nodded. Let's do it. Then she added casually, oh, and I've nominated you for the internal ethics panel. We need someone who reads the footnotes. I blinked. That's big. You've been doing the job already, she said. We're just making it official. That weekend, I sat on my balcony with a folder in my lap. Not a contract, not a risk brief, just a printout of every message, every timestamp, every line of documentation from that week in March. I didn't need it anymore, but I kept it. Because one day, someone else will be asked for a password. One day, a new hire will hesitate at the line between, that's not my job, and this doesn't feel right. And maybe they'll remember that a clause once stopped a storm. That vigilance doesn't need permission. That integrity doesn't wait for a spotlight. Monday came. New requests, new reviews, new lines to read between. But now I wasn't alone. There was a protocol, a policy, a precedent. And quietly, in the vendor dashboard, Clause 14.7 sat in bold, under-enforced cases. A record, a lesson, a lighthouse. Because in a world of passwords and politics, sometimes the thing that saves you isn't louder. It's older, signed, logged, and ready.